Hello, everybody. Recording live from somewhere.
Welcome everybody back to the Pursuit Pod. Here today we have a lot of basketball discussion. Obviously, March Madness started up last Friday, and it went over through the weekend. I apologize for the lack of an episode last week. It was Clemson spring break. I wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. It was a very restful spring break for me, a very restful week. Just kind of sitting back, watching some March Madness, taking a break from school, taking a break from just other things in my life, but still keeping up with everything. So I apologize for not being able to do an accurate preview of March Madness and all that, but we did, of course. I posted my bracket to everyone, which is, it hasn't been going so well. I'm last in my group's challenge. So, but Houston was my pick, and they're still holding strong, and I still think that they have what it takes to win the whole thing. So, as long as the champion gets predicted right, which I haven't had in a minute, but as long as they get predicted right, then we're still alive, and we'll still be top 3 in the bracket challenge. So, that'll be fun stuff. So, the basketball talk already began, so let's just dive right in, of course, to Roundball Rock. And to start out with just some NBA news, just because of the NBA season's kind of going down to the wire, the playoff race is heating up a little bit. But to start out, of course, there's been talks of expansion in the NBA for the last few years. Specifically the fact that basically the Seattle and Las Vegas teams that are going to be expanded into the NBA are all but confirmed and all but speculated on. But now we have this whole conversation of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Memphis Grizzlies being moved to the Eastern Conference, which in my eyes makes a lot of sense. I think that it's the best way to balance the league out, not just in its expansion, but also the fact that Memphis, Minnesota are both teams that are more on the eastern side than they are on the western side. It makes sense, especially when now you're going to have a team in Seattle and Las Vegas that'll push the Western Conference boundaries even farther west. So now there's not a lot of leeway for Minnesota and Memphis to be in the group. But I think that overall this makes the NBA much more competitive, because we're going to see Minnesota, again, a team that they've been to the Western Conference Finals however many times. Anthony Edwards, they're a dynasty in the West. They're going to be rising and rising next few years. And now we're seeing them. They might get moved to the East in however many years whenever the expansions are finalized. And now we're seeing a Minnesota team that's going to add so much competitive nature to the East. We're going to see them play more games against Boston, play more games against... we're going to see them play more games against, I said, Boston. They'll be playing Memphis as well, especially if they move over. We'll be seeing them play teams that are just, it's going to add a lot more competitive nature to the league overall. We're going to see them play against the competitors of the Eastern Conference, the Cavaliers, guys, the teams like those, and it's going to really add. We already see that, contrary to what John Morant said, the Minnesota Timberwolves are actually fine in the West. Memphis is not fine in the West, and we'll see them kind of be, at least for the next year, with the bottom feeders of the East, especially whenever just looking at the future of the standings, and whenever this move actually does take place, especially if this is what the NBA actually goes along with, because again, it's not exactly confirmed. There's no logos being confirmed, and even if it was, it wouldn't happen in the next few years. So I just think that Minnesota moving to the East, on paper, it seems like that just means they're automatic finals contenders the next few years. But at the same time, it's going to add another contender to the Eastern Conference, especially with Seattle and Las Vegas, especially in the first few years. Unless it's like hockey, you're not going to see those teams compete in the playoffs for the first few years, no expansion team does that. So that's fun stuff, and there's not a lot of analysis to go along with that. I just think that Minnesota being added to the East, and I've been a huge proprietor for the Eastern Conference being bolstered, especially with the fact that I want more guys going to the East. I want, like I was saying with the Giannis trade to one of my buddies, that I want the if Giannis is going to get traded, I want him to stay within the East in some way. I liked the idea of him going to Miami, because it allows the East to stay competitive. It allows more superstars to go to the East, and it's not going to be too top heavy in the West, because the West is so competitive right now, and they have teams that are going to be way over 500, like best teams in the league. Spurs, all those teams are going to be the best in the league, and they're going to be fighting within like 3 games of each other, while the East, it's going to be like the top 2, and then it's going to be a big gap, and then it's going to be like from 3 to the end of the play-in is going to be like basically right next to each other, and in a worse way than the West. So just cool stuff. I like that idea of that. And a big discussion which has happened recently, especially with the Players Association, specifically calling for the end of the 65-game rule, which I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. To begin, Joel Embiid, they created this rule in spite of him. And when he got hurt, it was boo-hoo, whatever. No one cares about the 65-game rule. That was when load management was happening. That was when the best players in the league weren't playing, and they were ruled out of awards. But the moment that Jokic, SGA might get out of contention, Cade Cunningham might get out of contention, now the Players Association is trying to put down the ban hammer. They're trying to put down it's because the truth is the 65-game rule has taken the best of the best guys out of award talks, and that's solely because of crappy late season injuries that don't even really affect their numbers. Like Tyrese Maxey has been on an absolute tear this entire season, but he's going to miss the last 3 weeks or so of the season, and that automatically is going to take him out of any award discussion, and boom, now less accolades for contracts, less accolades for his legacy, that kind of thing, which don't seem important right now, especially with awards. You really have to weigh how meaningful they are, but the fact is we might get an MVP that's not SGA, not Jokic, not Cade Cunningham. What's that going to look like? Especially, SGA should stay healthy the rest of the way, but I just think, if SGA's not going to be healthy to win this award, because, again, we've talked about it in the recent episodes, but, he's basically all but locked up this award. So the fact that he might not get it, especially with injury potential, and Jokic, he's already out of the race, that kind of thing. It just, again, those injuries that just seem so minuscule, especially the success of the team, end up becoming a big factor in this race. And now the fact that Cade Cunningham, a dude who's he was the last chance to really get the MVP, especially with the top 2 being injury prone, especially at the beginning of the season, now we're seeing him moved out of that conversation. Now the Players Association is trying to put down the hammer. And even the most improved race is becoming a joke. Michael Porter Jr., Dylan Brooks, Denny, those are guys that are all most improved player contenders. That's their top 3 right there, and they're eliminated from contention. And now it's who's going to be most improved player? You're going to have Pods as your most improved player and your MVP and whatever. Bill Simmons said that there's an easy solution for this, and that would be to base it off of minutes. Namely, if you have 2,000 plus minutes. So 2,000 minutes for the average starter, let's say 32, 33 minutes per game, or maybe a little more, 35, 36. That's roughly 62 games. So that's already giving a little more grace for these guys that are going to barely miss the award rule and just barely miss that timing. They're going to be tossed into this little category that's going to be how many minutes do they really have? Because the truth is, again, guys like Tyrese Maxey, they're playing the 3rd most minutes in the league, but they're going to be eliminated from the award talk because of their late season injury that shouldn't affect the way that they're perceived in any award race, in any All-NBA conversation, but now it is. And Tom Haberstroth of Yahoo Sports put it probably the best, stating that this 65-game rule, essentially the cure of the 65-game rule is worse than disease, because now you're going to have guys like Cade who want to come back in before the season's over just so they can keep the MVP conversation alive for them. And they're going to come in, they're going to rush their injury recovery. That's going to ruin their playoffs, especially if something goes bad, because we know, especially with the Joel Embiid story, that if you try to rush injury recovery or try to fake it, eventually you're just going to be too mangled to even be able to play at a high level. And so the biggest question is just, are we going to see awards, especially with the 65 game rule being set in place for however long? Because I know something in me thinks that the rule is going to end by the end of this season, just because of the Players Association is finally speaking up about it. It's happening to players that aren't media hated players like Embiid. It's happening to Cade, guys that everyone loves Cade, everyone loves Jokic, everyone loves SGA. At least the media loves SGA, not really NBA Twitter. But besides that, now we're going to see the same guys. We're going to see Mikal Bridges up there because he plays every game. Just things like that. We're going to see guys who play every game be the awards for the next few seasons unless they get rid of this rule. And finally, to talk some March Madness here in this basketball segment. I'm sorry that I didn't really cover a lot of college basketball. It's a lot to look at. There's so many. I just didn't want it to become me reciting stat lines, because that's kind of how I started the podcast, saying, look at these freshmen to watch out for. This guy's this. And I feel like, especially in college basketball, and there's stuff happening every single day that change the entire scope of things, it's kind of hard to, create my own takes out of that, especially because there's just so much content out there already that kind of takes the words out of my mouth. But I will say something I noticed in this March Madness that's been, overwhelmingly the conversation in this tournament right now, especially last year, was the favorites went 16-0 in the second day of the first round action. And this was the first time in the first round that the favorites went undefeated for the first time since 1992. And so now, especially casual watchers of March Madness are starting to ask, is this the end of the madness of March? Are upsets now becoming more rare? Has NIL really taken it all away? And there's an argument for both sides. It's yes and no. Yes, the madness is going away, but also no, the madness is still here. Watch the Duke versus Siena game. It's a 1 versus 16 seed, and Siena was running a 5-man rotation, not even utilizing any bench until the very last minutes of the game, when the game was already out of reach. But that went down to the final punches. Siena was maybe 1 botched rebound, 2 missed layups away from beating out Duke, and they've shown weakness to this 1 seed that was supposed to be destined to win it all. They're the number 1 overall team in the tournament itself. That kind of thing, I think, already, it's pretty prevalent to the madness going on in March. I think that because this is the thing, this tournament has shown us so much of so many close games, and I think the biggest trend so far have been teams being down by 20, and then you look at the final score, and all of a sudden it was a game that went down to the final shot. Look at a game like Santa Clara versus Kentucky, where you see, that was one of the greatest tournament games of all time, you could argue. That literally had an amazing Chris Jenkins-esque shot for Santa Clara, and then literally they turn around, inbound, without even a timeout, puts it up, Kentucky ties that game, they go to overtime, Kentucky edges them out, which is just absurd. And people might not talk about that game a lot in the future because Santa Clara didn't pull off the upset, but you have to start actually watching the games to see that the March Madness, the title of the madness is still here. It's not just the men's tournament. This is madness. You are seeing teams that you would never pick come close. And even if they don't win it, which again, winning is everything for the most part. So especially in the tournament, it all depends on how far you go. If you get Elite Eights, Final Fours, national championships, then you're respected as a coach. You're respected as a team. Your team will be remembered. But the thing that lingers are the upsets. And I think, honestly, a big part of people kind of just being like, hey, I think the madness is over, I think the spark of March Madness is gone, is because of how spoiled we've been with all these amazing Cinderella runs. There was legit a time, at least in the last few years, where there was always a Cinderella run. That doesn't happen in every tournament. That's what made the last few years of tournaments so special. That's what made that Final Four with UConn, San Diego State, those teams that were, it was like 2 9 seeds and a 4 and a 5. That's what made those Final Four so special, because that never happens. And even when it does happen, people are asking for those 1 seeds to be there. If anything, we've been spoiled with the FDU, the UMBCs of the world, that come in and they actually pull off the impossible, where you get spoiled with the St. Peters of the world going to the Sweet 16 Elite Eight. I forget exactly where they placed at the end of it, but that's the thing. And you still see mid-majors teams mid-major teams, being benefited from transfer rules. We see a lot of mid-majors, St. Louis for a big example, they have so much money that they can invest in this. And the fact that actually these teams that can end up keeping it close, they actually get more money out of NIL. They can actually spread it. If anything, I think the biggest problem with March Madness is the way that we treated Miami, Ohio. And I talked about this in the last episode. But with Miami, Ohio, that's a team that they deserve to make the tournament the entire year. And they barely put them into the tournament. And yes, they probably went as far as they would have anyway. But that's the thing. I always said that a 6 seed would have been the best for them. But that's the thing. Miami, Ohio should have been in the tournament from the moment that they went undefeated. They should have been a top 8 seed, but then they got thrown into the first 4. That's the conversation. That's the biggest issue with March Madness right now. The fact that mid-majors basically have no meaning. Mid-majors and their success, they practically mean nothing for the sake of March Madness. And that's, if anything, that's what's killing the madness. We have to see these mid-majors. If people want to see Cinderella teams, why are you going to root against Miami, Ohio being in the tournament? Why are you going to root against these mid-major teams that are actually good, like Santa Clara, for example, going away? And now we're going to see the St. Mary's coach leave St. Mary's, and then St. Mary's, again, that's just the end of a big name mid-major with that, especially with Gonzaga leaving that conference. Now we're seeing just the death of the mid-major rule over March Madness, over the NCAA. And that's just the biggest shame, I think, in college basketball. If anything, that's what's taking away the madness. But it's not the Cinderellas. It's not the upsets. We've been spoiled with just the rose-tinted glasses that we've had in March Madness. I mean, these upsets don't happen every single year. Last year, we saw a tournament that it was all 1 seeds, all 2 seeds, all 3 seeds that advanced that far. We're not used to that. And I think that, if anything, we kind of have to get more used to that. We have to get more used to the 1 seeds winning. We have to get more used to the 2 seeds going all the way. We have to get used to that. When we keep looking at madness, the March Madness, as being, and it is a desert storm. It's 2 teams get thrown into the middle of nowhere, and they're forced to fend out for their lives, see who advances. There's teams that are going to get exposed. If anything, there has to be some better seeding, a better committee that puts teams that deserve to be those top seeds in the top seeds. Or, if anything, allow them to overrate teams a little more. That way we can get more upsets. But it's not the fact that there are no upsets. It's just the fact that we're not giving praise to mid-major teams. We're allowing them to fall behind if they're not like a bigger program in terms of NIL money. We're seeing those coaches leave after 1 year. Then, boom, that program doesn't become a mainstay. That's why we got teams like Gonzaga. They have Mark Few, that he's been there for however long, and he's led them to Final Fours. He's led them to national championships, at least to the finals, not actually winning them. Those kinds of things. We've seen Gonzaga make it far, and they've had the same coach as a mid-major. When we're seeing the Siena coach leave after 1 great year, just for example, then that's going to be the death of the March Madness, because the NIL era is taking over coaches as well. I mean, that's always been a thing. We saw like Tobin Anderson left for Iona immediately after that FDU win. But again, I just think the main thing about March Madness is the fact that we are very spoiled with however many upsets we've had in the past few years. And that's a big reason why people are not too excited about this tournament right now, because Santa didn't win. For example, Santa Clara didn't pull it off. The only upset that was really big was, I guess, Texas VCU, but it was High Point. And even then, it's like, how much are you going to judge the wins of these teams? And especially with Cinderella teams, you had teams like Butler back in the day that would go all the way and beat it real Cinderella, but that never happens. They were an outlier. We are so spoiled in the last 20 years of how good this tournament's been, with upsets and with favorites going out all the time, that we have to kind of ground ourselves now to realize that's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen in every tournament. And March Madness is fun because we like seeing that happen, but the truth is, it's not going to happen every tournament. There's not always going to be a St. Peter's. There's not always going to be an FDU. And we love to root for it. That's what makes making a bracket so fun. Even the people that I know that don't like sports, they love filling out brackets. That kind of thing. And they like to follow the games just because they want to see if their team that they picked can go all the way. But that's the fun of it. But not every March Madness tournament is going to be exactly how it looks on paper. That's the biggest thing to remember, especially with this tournament, because we have a great tournament right now. Every game's been close. The only real blowout was that Florida game. The only real blowout was the game with McNeese as well. They weren't too close, but like that's been the only two blowouts. The rest of them have been a lot of come from behind wins that people are not going to talk about until the higher seed, in terms of actual like numerical value, like a 9 seed over an 8. They're not going to matter until that like double-digit team wins, but that just doesn't happen. We've been so spoiled with that. I think people need to kind of take off their rose-tinted glasses and realize this is college basketball, man. And if you're not going to watch the greatest tournament in sports because it's all 1 seeds, all 2 seeds, then you're not watching for the right reasons. That's all I can say. We're going to skip into my stick on the ice just because the craziness of NFL free agency has waned over the past 2 weeks. There's not a lot of stuff going on. We're still waiting on Aaron Rodgers. We're still waiting on to see if the Raiders do anything about Max Crosby, but I think they're going to retain him. And we're kind of in that weird transition period where the bulk of free agency is over, but the draft's coming up. So into some NHL hockey talk, and we have 2 stories for you guys based off of 2 articles, one from the Hockey News and one from the Athletic. So to start out, Ryan O'Hara of the Hockey News he basically did a dissection piece on the Colorado Avalanche, who have seen like one of the most untouchable teams in the NHL, arguably in NHL history, just because they started out for a long time going on a streak without any real strong regulation losses. They only had like 2 for a majority of the year. But the Avalanche they have Achilles heels. They have flaws that have shined as the playoffs have come closer. And Ryan O'Hara talked about this specifically, talking about massive defensive cracks, barely saved by like a top 3 offense in the league. And that's really been masked over by their historic start to the season. And even with this, the offense have showed signs of the ability to be beat with, Jack Drury's lacking recent scoring. Brock Nelson just has completely plateaued and hit a wall when it comes to scoring goals. And the younger offensive members have really received little ice time and little development as a result, and they can't really make a true impact on this team. So even the offense is beginning to wane. And the issue is that the Avalanche, compared to their 2022 team, have overall become just a very top-heavy offense and a very top-heavy team, very top-heavy team in terms of their lines. And like the 2022 team, that team that McKinnon, Makar, they won that Stanley Cup. They were a team that was all 4 lines could score there. That was an all 4 lines can score type of team. Not to mention that this 2026 team, their at once historic penalty kill has also hit a wall. So overall, the Avalanche they're starting to fall off a cliff a little bit. They're still going to be like the top contender for the Stanley Cup this year, but they have cracks. There is some cracks in the foundation there, just like every team will have. And this was a team that just seemed untouchable at one point. Even all the moves they made in the trade deadline have just seemed so amazing. And like they're basically going to be the surefire winners of this Stanley Cup. But the truth is, they're a little farther away than we might suspect. And lastly, for my stick on the ice, I saw an article from Harman Dial of The Athletic, which brought up something really interesting that I've been thinking about, especially after watching the Olympics. So in the Winter Olympics, obviously, the tail of the tape has always been goalies. I mean, it was Jordan Binnington versus Hellebuck in that Olympic finals, and that's when we saw Hellebuck was just continued to write himself off as the greatest goalie in the NHL right now, one of the most consistent. And that's the thing. Goaltending can only come so far. The Italian goalie was good, but the team around him was not that good. And goaltending makes or breaks championship teams. It makes or breaks how far you go in the playoffs, as an example. But overall, there might be a goalie issue in the NHL today. And I mean, you can look at that just from the fact that there are only so many consistent elite goaltenders like Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, that there are these elite, wild, big names. And then you have other guys who have shown up at the playoffs that have been consistent for so long, won championships like Bobrovsky, Aiden Hill, sorry, and they get paid, right? They get paid big numbers, and they end up putting terrible numbers up this recent season, just randomly, very mysteriously. And then you find guys like that are like backup journeymen that become stars. I mean, even look at Dan Vladar. That's a guy that came out of nowhere for the Flyers. He was a cheap signing for us, and then all of a sudden he's just been incredible for us. And then eventually the cycle's going to continue. They're going to get paid, and then the elite status they have is going to completely fall off. And that's the thing. There's really no true link between the payment of the goalie tandem and their performance. It's just been absolutely destroyed, especially this year. The Rangers in Boston, they have great goals saved above expected numbers with high $10+ million cap hits. But then you have Florida, and we just mentioned Bobrovsky. They are spending $11.1 million on their goalie tandem, and they have a negative 17.2 goals saved above expected number. And then it's just a mishmash going down there, even with a lot of those 10 million plus teams that have, it's pluses goals saved, and then it's minus goals saved all across the board without really, it doesn't start plus, then goes negative. It starts out with plus, negative, plus negative, and then it keeps fluctuating just like that. And then you even have Calgary and Pittsburgh, that they're the bottom of the spending portal. Pittsburgh was spending $3 million around that margin. They have a plus 6.3 goals saved above expected. Then you have Calgary, who's spending barely $1.5 million on their tandem, and they have a plus 14 goals saved above expected, that's doubling and then some the Florida numbers, which is just absurd. Then you can even look at the playoffs, where there's been teams with superior goaltenders that have only won 17 of 45 playoff matchups since 2023. And then the years before, in the 2020s, that was completely opposite. It was always the superior goaltender would win. And you can even look at that and this was after the metric, but we always talk about how the story of Oilers versus Panthers the past two Stanley Cups have been the fact that Bobrovsky gets it done and Skinner doesn't. But now we're seeing it doesn't matter. Skinner, he's one of the most inconsistent goalies in the league, he could win some big games against some good goalies. He could lose some games against some better goalies and also worse goalies. And that's the thing. You also can mention that the 2026 average save percentage for all goalies in the NHL has hit record lows since the 1994 season. And maybe we're looking at an 80s type of thing where it's, the rise of offensive talent and analytics. Not to mention, it's also hard to take gambles and risks on goalies because they can be deciding factors in making or breaking championship teams, just like the Edmonton Oilers. And that's really the biggest story of this big goalie dilemma right now in the NHL. Especially in the fact that it really doesn't matter how much you pay them. It doesn't really matter. We're seeing goalies kind of dwindle. We're seeing more goals being put into the net. And again, maybe that's just because, just like basketball, we're seeing hockey maybe at its most talented. There's always conversations of how much better is McDavid talent-wise over Gretzky, just as an example, those kinds of things. So maybe it is just the talent pool, that kind of thing, just getting better for the league. But the truth is that there is a goalie dilemma here in the NHL. And again, maybe it's just the offensive influx being better. Maybe it's just goalies becoming more inconsistent. Maybe it's just goaltenders kind of losing their sweet spot in the league as a result of this offensive talent. But it's something that's got to be figured out soon, especially because now, again, like I said, the gamble is not going to want to be taken there. And we need to see a change in that, especially with elite goalies. And even like Hellebuck, looking at his numbers this season have been pretty average compared to his amazing Hall of Fame level career. So now you're just like, what's going on there with goalies? So, and to transition there, of course, have the Flyers shirt on, but not the happiest right now. In my notes, I originally said the Flyers are not out yet of the playoffs, but after that loss to Columbus, where they just completely took the last two periods off, it's basically over for the Flyers. And I know I said that a few weeks ago, but they gave us hope. They had a 9-2-1 record over the last stretch of games before Columbus, which was right after I declared them done on that podcast that I talked about them. Just there was nothing to talk about. But the X factor of this run has been Owen Tippett, 5 goals, 2 assists through 10 March games. He's been an absolute fighter. His aggression has been incredible, but just they need the whole offense, they need the whole defense to have that aggression, to have just that fight in them to actually go as far as they can. They just didn't show that against Columbus, and I mean, there still is, like, just logistically, there might be a hope still, but overall, this is just the same era, and I've said that before. It's just kind of, it's been the same exact thing over and over again the past few years. And I was telling a buddy that, hey, we're going to have Martone come in. The younger guys bumping Barkey, they're going to be more developed. Maybe any other prospects come up. Maybe we'll actually make some moves in free agency, make some moves in trades in the offseason. But the truth is, how much can we expect from this ownership for the Flyers? How much can we expect just in general coming out of this Philadelphia organization? And that's just been the same talking point over and over again every time I do one of these podcasts, talking about how much can the Flyers really improve themselves, because, again, they were supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league this year, and they didn't show that till the very end. Our Super Bowl was that Ducks game where Zegras put the phone down. That was supposed to be our jump to go to the playoffs finally and to, exceed expectations. But if anything, we went 500 since that game. That was a situation where we had to decide to just win or we had to decide to just lose from there. I would have been fine if we just gave up our momentum and just allowed it to lose, because then we would have had a draft spot. Now we're just out of the playoffs. So now it's just the same exact mediocre draft pick unless we get lucky in the lottery, that kind of thing, hoping that maybe someone splashes, maybe someone goes for Coots in trade, and just, even Ristolainen, maybe someone gets him with his value, but who knows what his value is right now. And then with his re-signed Zegras, well, I don't see him leaving, but God forbid, just our luck. It's the same purgatory that we're stuck in for Philadelphia, and at least I can rep the team with my shirt. But overall, there's not a lot of good stuff to come out of that. It's been fun the past 2 weeks. There's still the Ted Lasso Believe gif, but I don't know. It's just, it's the same pessimism that you're kind of subject to, especially when it comes to the Philadelphia Flyers. But at least we have the Sixers. I guess they're kind of in a sticky spot now, being stuck in the play-in with just mere games separating them from the 7 seed to the 10 seed. They have games coming up against the Bulls, Wizards, Pacers, Hornets, Bucks that will definitely boost us in the rankings, especially if we're talking on paper. But of course, the loss to OKC in the upcoming stretch with Houston and San Antonio will be scary. But Paul George is back, which will be massive veteran presence for the playoffs, especially if we actually do make it. We can get at that play-in or even work our way up to a 6 seed again. He can step up as the veteran with the season going pretty well before his suspension. His suspension just turned everything around. Austin Krell of Sports Illustrated stated that there's actually been some improvements in this Sixers team since Maxey went on injury 2 weeks ago. And that's mainly contributing to the fact that the remaining leading scorers of the Sixers, without Paul George, Embiid, and Maxey, in VJ, Quentin Grimes, and Justin Edwards, have all decreased their turnover rates in that stretch. Essentially, without Tyrese Maxey being there, the Sixers have tried to commit themselves to becoming more mistake-free basketball players. VJ went from 10.7 turnover rate to 8.6%. Quentin Grimes went from 13.8 to 10, and Justin Edwards dropped from 10.1 to 5.2. And overall, Justin Edwards has come out of nowhere with improved shooting splits across the board. He's spread out overall shooting share, which is, VJ has done that himself as well. He's taken smarter threes, but then Justin Edwards has been attempting less threes. He's been going for more inside shots, playing more fundamental physical basketball that it contributes to scoring, and it gets us wins that we need in the standings, but we need to work for the next few stinkers of teams that we're actually going to end up playing. And there's probably guaranteed losses to San Antonio, who might just be the championship winners this year. OKC, of course, You're not going to get anything out of that. And then Houston, it could be a toss-up, it could be a fight, but that's the thing. We have to play to the level. We have to play to our level. We can't let the levels of the teams that we're playing get to us. We can't let ourselves go down to their level. We have to play as if we deserve to be in the playoffs. The Flyers couldn't, but the Sixers very well could, especially with Paul George coming back. And again, the season was going insanely well before he went out on suspension. Then Embiid got hurt again. Maxi's been out. So there's still some hope. There's still some belief in this Sixers team, but they just have to prove it. And that's really just the story of Philadelphia sports right now. They have to prove it. Everyone's got to prove it. Everyone's got to prove that they can be there, that they can be in that moment. So, and to finish off, and I'm sorry for the lack of Eagles talk, but the Clemson Corner got a lot of stuff, mainly negative, and I hate making these pods so negative, but when negative things are happening, what can you do there? Clemson basketball went down in the first round of March Madness versus Iowa, which is, it's a loss I saw coming, but now the question should be asked, what happened? Again, people are talking about Carter Welling being out, which might have been the biggest thing because you need that tougher athletic play, especially inside. And then the guard play has still been inconsistent, which is they come up short as expected. But then what about Brad Brunell? And I'm again, article coming out for the Tiger about Brad Brunell, specifically what we should be thinking about when talking about him, and if he is the future of Clemson, especially now that he has 16 years under his belt. He's had Elite 8 runs, Sweet 16 runs under his belt, but does he have it, what it takes to bring us to the next step and get us a little closer to the Blue Bloods? Again, it's been back-to-back first-round disappointments for the Brunell Tigers. But the last 8 years have been a new evolution for Clemson basketball, especially with the recent Elite 8 appearance in 2024. Jim Boeheim, of course, Syracuse legendary coach there. He's going to be he is a Hall of Famer. Said that Brunell, he simply won't be recognized until he does something in the NCAA tournament. And that's the thing. Brunell brings the Tigers consistently to the NCAA tournament. He always has great placement in the ACC standings. His defensive play that he enlists upon his schemes and upon his players works. We're always a great scoring defensive team. And again, we've been to back-to-back tournaments, and we went far in 2024, and he always has good retention, good recruiting. The schemes work. He overcoaches them. He's a good leader. But the thing is, then you have the offensive droughts year to year. After January, when Clemson's ranked 10 in the nation, we end up falling off. And we're still lacking both an ACC regular season title and as well as an ACC conference title, which is hard with, it's hard when we're in the same conference as Duke. Syracuse historically, North Carolina, those are the teams that are always going to be fighting for it. But the thing is, Florida State's done it before. Those teams have done it before. And I know they had NBA talent. And maybe that's what we need. We need to develop more NBA talent, more NBA-ready players that actually can make a big step, be those award potential players. Because especially this last year, it was a lot about spreading out the ball, and the fact is we kind of lacked a clutch player. But at the same time, it's just that's what Clemson basketball has been. Especially this year, we had a deep team, 1 through 15 could play, which seems like a great thing until you go deeper into that tournament and you realize that yes, depth matters, especially in that first few rounds. But at the same time, it's really all about who can be a clutch scorer. You see Darius Acuff of Arkansas, who's been just an absolute difference maker for the Razorbacks. That kind of thing. You need that in Clemson basketball. We haven't had any real major NBA role players, NBA stars especially. That's what brought FSU to those ACC titles, those kind of things. That's what we need in Clemson. And I don't know how much you can blame Brownell for that. Because again, Carter Welling was out. That's a shame. The guard play has been inconsistent all year, especially when it gets into February, March. How much can you really change the inconsistent play? How much can you yell at them? How much practice can you force them to sit through for for that to change. You can't. That just has to be the players changing. That has to be the players caring. And I'm not saying the players don't care, because they care. We got to the tournament. They always fight every game. We always are ahead by a lot or behind by a lot. And it's always a continual fight in those games. But I don't know how much you can blame this on Brunell. And again, because I think his resume speaks for himself. And Boeheim said that. Again, no one's going to care about you unless you win that championship, or unless you go to that Final Four. And it's a shame that we have to discredit coaches to that, because again, there's always going to be the Dukes. There's always going to be the North Carolinas in your way. There's always going to be the Houstons, the Iowa States. These teams that have such amazing coaches that are basically guaranteed Elite Eight, Final Four every year, no matter what. No matter, even if their roster is 10 times worse than the year before. These are teams, especially in these 5-year periods, that are going to be in that Final Four, that Elite Eight year to year. How much, until we just get our NIL money up for basketball, or we even just bring in a better staff, better players, better recruits, that's the conversation you got to have. It's almost like the Kyler Murray conversation in the NFL. And this is a very, very weird analogy, but please just bear with me here. So Kyler Murray has always been kind of like that. He's been above average. He's a top 16 quarterback for sure, but he's not exactly a top 10 quarterback. He's kind of in that like above average, but still kind of average spot. Can you attribute that to Brad Brunell? Can you attribute him to being a top 25, top 30 coach, but not exactly top 20 coach, not exactly top 20 scheme, top 20 team in general? That's the conversation. If you get rid of Brunell, as we've seen other ACC teams do, getting rid of their coaches after like 3 years, seeing they don't work. But we have a coach who has a proven track record as a guy who can bring a team to the tournament, who can bring a team to pretty good in the ACC standings. What's the move here? Can you get rid of him with good reason? Can you get rid of him expecting for Clemson to be uprooted as just this amazing Final Four worthy program? Can you bring in another coach, unless you're bringing in like the Coach K's, the Jay Wrights of the world? In college basketball, if you have a guy who's been doing it for so long that gets good results like Brunell has, can you blame it on him? That's the biggest question. I don't know how to answer it specifically, because again, I think it's just the Kyler Murray thing. Is it smart to get rid of Kyler Murray when you know that? What other options do you really have that are available on the market? That's the thing. That's the thing for Clemson to remember. And I think that, again, he just recently got a contract extension last year. He's going to be here till 2031 unless things change. I don't see a reason to get rid of him now unless the next 2 years are just absolute flukes. But with the new era of Clemson just in general in their athletics, with Dabo, people are now questioning if they even want Dabo for the foreseeable future. And again, it's the conversation of what are the better options, those kinds of things. That's kind of plaguing all of Clemson's sports right now. And we've found women's basketball has their coach. Women lax is on the rise. The gymnastics team just won the ACC, in their third year. Incredible. That's incredible stuff. Baseball is pretty consistent, and we're about to get to them. So I guess this is kind of a transition. They're pretty consistent in their results, always getting to regionals, always getting to the early rounds of the NCAA tournament there. But then it's like basketball, football. Do you want to settle with these coaches that have been here for a long time by now, especially been here for a long time, considering the new age of not really allowing your coach to settle and firing him if one bad thing goes wrong or if two bad things go wrong in a row? That's the thing. Do you want to take... I don't think we should. I don't think we should take the risk on Brunell, getting rid of him. I think that we have to play it out, see what happens. Again, maybe if it keeps being back-to-back round of 64 losses, then I think you have to keep continuing to evaluate the team itself, because it was inconsistent guard play, this and that. Can you really blame that on Brunell? Especially if... what adjustments can you make, especially if those guys that are in that 11 through 15 spot on the bench, if they're not coming in producing those numbers and their guards or whatever, then they can't fit the scheme either. It's not like the NBA where you can trade for another person. That's the thing with college sports. How much can you really blame on the coach? Because the coach will always be the one to blame in really any sport. But especially in college basketball, when you have the success of how much do you weigh just going to the tournament? How much do you weigh going this far in the ACC tournament? How much do you weigh placing at this rank in like the ACC standings in the regular season? That's the conversations that you have to have with just the idea of maybe canning a coach away from their program, especially if they've been there for the last 16 years and they're on a contract that'll extend them continuing on. That's the conversation. And I get into that for my upcoming article, so I don't want to continue on that conversation. But it is relevant. It is incredibly relevant to like what we should be speaking about here, especially with the future of Clemson basketball, because they could very well use these next few years and rise, especially in the NIL era, to becoming closer to blue bloods. Not exactly blue bloods, but they could become closer to being an Elite 8 lock every year, Final 4 lock every year. They could get there. Brunell could be the guy that gets them there. And how much it just depends on how much you weigh the successes of even just getting to the tournament kind of deal in this day and age of college basketball. And the final discussion for the Clemson Corner will be a quick one, and it's just the fact that Clemson baseball, after I was just raving about how good their start was, they're now in the downward spiral. Can they really hang with these ranked teams? We just lost last night, the very last minute, to Coastal Carolina after leading them 7-2. I saw we lost. They scored 11 runs. Like what? We got swept by Notre Dame. Clemson's just completely dropped out of the D1 baseball rankings. They're now 1-5 in ACC play, which is confusing because they have the best ERA in the ACC, as well as very low opponent batting average under 200. An amazing rotation, bullpen. Aiden Kanak's been amazing. Michael Sharman's just been unbelievable for us as a Tiger, but the defense has just been abysmal. Before the Coastal game, they had 33 errors in 24 games. They've given up 21 unearned runs so far on the season, and not to mention that despite the offensive explosions, especially in ACC play, the Tigers have proven that they just cannot hit in the clutch, and it's as simple as that. When they have runners in scoring position in that Georgia Tech series, in the two losses that they saw against them, they went 0-6. And even for the Notre Dame series, the entire series, in scoring position, when they had runners that could advance on a single, they went 4 for 26. This Tigers team has a lot to change. It's not just because usually the woes have always been the pitching, and usually it's like kind of like a goaltender in hockey. When you have good pitching, that leads to wins. But and especially because the offense has been exploding, but just the fact that you get guys on base and you just cannot advance them across home plate, and then you have like the Alec Bohms of the world, they're committing 3 errors in one game. You have that all over the Tigers defense. There has to be some more discipline on the defense. There has to be some more clutch hitting, because clutch hitting, I mean, baseball's hard. And again, it's one of those things that you're not guaranteed to hit in clutch situations. You have to get hot for it. These Tigers need to, when they get hot, to stay hot, because they've had amazing pitching, and they cannot waste this rotation. They cannot waste this bullpen that they have, especially against ACC teams. We've been seeing them pitching well against these high caliber teams. And the fact that they have the best ERA in the ACC right now, they need to capitalize off that. But instead, they're moving 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, with the defense just being abysmal. And that's just been the story of Clemson baseball so far at this specific time, at this specific period. And, I mean, the beginning of the season is always rough in college baseball, especially for the Tigers. They always kind of start out kind of mid-tier. They eventually get their regional in the tournament, but we want to see some success here on their baggage. I want to see some disciplined Tigers. I want to see the bats going off when they need to, because the pitching's just been incredible. You don't get that ever, especially in college baseball. When you have guys of this high caliber that can pitch lights out, you need to support that with good batting, with good defense behind him, especially with how much promise the beginning of the season showed with the blowouts against Army, the blowouts against LaSalle. You have to continue that in any way possible. And overall, that'll be it for this episode of the Pursuit Pod. Again, I'm sorry for the lack of football talk overall, but it's kind of it's not football season. Just in college and NFL, there's not a lot to talk about. So I kind of want to save the majority of the NFL talk to come after the draft, do a mock draft, show everyone my mock draft, that kind of thing. So will be in the works, so stay tuned for that. But this has been episode 16 of the Pursuit Pod. And again, I appreciate everyone who listens week to week, or even just tune in every now and then off my Instagram story or something. I always appreciate all of you for just tuning in, watching a little bit of it, watching the Instagram clips. Any support that you guys show is just so big, so incredible for me. And I look forward to making these every week. And I look forward to uploading them every week. And the support and love will never go unnoticed. So I appreciate all of you. I appreciate anyone that shares my episodes to anyone. Even just to get one view. I don't care if I get 1 view, 0 views, 1,000 views on this one. At least someone will be out there hearing my voice and hearing my work, even if it is just me, even if it's just on the Instagram clips. As long as someone's listening, then I'm getting out there to someone. So I appreciate everyone for listening, tuning in. Love you all. The bottom of my heart. So go Tigers, go Sixers. I guess that's really the main shout outs of today. So I'll see you all next week.